What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Hogmolly Hustle. Thank you for spending your time watching us, and I hope you stick around. And if you like what you hear, please sack that like button and subscribe so you can keep up with all the stuff that we put out. And if you agree with what we say or disagree with what we say, please leave a well thought out and kind message in the comment section, wherever that may be. Well, Austin, it was a big week in the NFL. And if I remember correctly, last week when we were making our Game of the Week selections, you were like, I don't know, it's a pretty bad week for the NFL. I don't know what to expect from it. But I think this week in the NFL was one of the most exciting overall. There's a lot of cool things that happened.
Yeah, I think it surpassed my expectations. The matchups weren't glamorous, but a lot of photo finishes. A lot of clutch performances by some kickers that we'll hint on later.
Yeah. And today's going to be a little bit different than what we have done in the past couple of episodes. In one way, I hope that it's different because we aren't going to have any technical issues, crossing the fingers. And the other way, we're going to be talking about the wild, wild west divisions in the NFL. We're going to be doing a deep dive and really getting into these divisions because they might just be the best divisions in football, and they are certainly the most exciting right now. So I guess let's go ahead and get started with the NFC West. Currently, the way they're standing, the NFC West is led by the Rams at 3-0, led by Matthew Stafford. The Cardinals at 3-0 are in second place. The Niners, who just lost the Packers, lost their first game, are now 2-1, and the Seahawks at 1-2. And that exact record is reflected in the AFC. And we'll get to that later. But let's go ahead and start with the Rams. What do you think about the Rams so far?
I think they're one of the most complete teams in the NFL. You look at a team that has it all, everything from the quarterback position, playmakers on offense, Deshaun Jackson. I had forgotten that Deshaun was even in LA, but this week he came up big with over 100 receiving yards, had a long touchdown against Tampa. Offensive line is solid. Defense, I mean, come on. They have playmakers. You got Aaron Donald on the defensive line. He came up huge in that win against the Bucs. Ramsey in coverage is key for them. So I think top to bottom, they're probably the most consistent, most well-rounded team in this division, and they probably have the best resume of anybody in this division so far. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a good point bringing up Deshaun Jackson, not the other one. He's not to be talked about. Deshaun Jackson. He had a couple of plays there where it was either overthrown or just not in the right spot where he could have had even more yards. There was one that was going to be a big touchdown that they didn't connect on. But he had a pretty big game, really showing that he's still got wheels on him. The rest of the receivers, I mean, they still got guys like Cooper Kupp, who's having a fantastic year. I mean, it's going to end up being a career year. Hopefully they all stay healthy. Robert Woods is not getting as much love, which kind of hurts me because he's on my fantasy team. But man, I'm a Packers fan, and I try to stay unbiased. But I have always been a huge Matthew Stafford fan, and I always defended Matthew Stafford whenever I heard any Matthew Stafford slander. And on Twitter, there was this weird wave of Matthew Stafford soft slandering, where they were saying, wow, I never knew he was this good when he's just slinging the ball out here, zinging it. Lines, frozen ropes, everywhere, just perfect spirals. And this is exactly what people wanted to see out of Matthew Stafford. And he's been doing this all his career. He just hasn't had guys to throw to. Every time he gets one really good target, he retires at the age of 30, and then you got whoever else you got to throw to. And I just love seeing Matthew Stafford in this team. And it is a real problem in the NFC. I mean, they went up to the defending Super Bowl champions, and they dominated for a good part of that game.
And I would say, in certain situations, you have this sort of feeling, watching a regular season game that you might see this again. Like you might, we might see this later on in the playoffs. We might see this in the Super Bowl even. One game that comes to mind for me is that I believe it was Week 17 in 2006, 2007, whenever the Patriots went undefeated throughout the regular season. They played the Giants the end of the regular season, and the Giants gave them the best game that they had all year. And in the back of my mind, you're just kind of, telling yourself, like, we might be seeing this again. And I think that, obviously they went and met in the Super Bowl and it was one for the ages, but I think this Bucks-Rams game definitely felt like one that we might be seeing again, specifically in the NFC Championship. I could definitely see that as a possibility, depending on how the rest of the regular season shakes up and what the playoff matchups are.
Yeah. And last year, people talked about with Jared Goff and how the receivers, they were all a bunch of lunch pail receivers that just got the job done. There was no real star. But I think Cooper Kupp's developing into a star. I mean, he's just having a fantastic year. You still have a lot of depth behind him, as we've already mentioned. And really, the only piece that team has really been missing is a legitimate quarterback. I'm not saying that Goff's not legitimate, because if you look at him in Detroit, I think he's playing better ball in Detroit. And maybe that's because of a change in system that fits him better. I think the Lions, even though their record does not represent this, the Lions have played 3 tough games to start the season, and they've played pretty well for the most part. They kind of got blown out against the Packers, but early on they were playing really well against the Packers. They played really, really well against the Ravens. This Lions team is not as bad as people are ragging on them for, and Jared Goff is having a pretty good season. And I'm happy to see that too, but this Rams team's something else. You have star power all around the roster. And on defense, of course, it's highlighted by the monster, the beast, the legend himself, Aaron Donald, and then Jalen Ramsey, one of the best corners of all time, most likely when all is said and done. Still got a lot of time to go, but he is just a physical freak, one of the most athletic corners I've ever seen. It is an impressive team.
Yeah, they definitely are. I would say, again, looking at the Rams, I don't think that there's a more well-rounded team that has shown their strengths on both sides of the ball all 3 weeks of the season better than the Rams have. And you look at their point differential; they're a plus 33 right now. They've scored 95 points in 3 games. They've only given up 62. So, I mean, that's a recipe for success. With Arizona, they're obviously 3-0 as well. With Arizona, you see the Cliff Kingsbury air raid offense coming in with Kyler just slinging it to so many different talented receivers, right? You got Hopkins. You had A.J. Green go for over 100 yards this past week. You got Christian Kirk. You got Moore. All these different guys that are versatile and they're creating separation so that Kyler can get the ball to them and then just get upfield, score points, keep the chains moving. Their big concern for me is I'm curious to see how well that defense holds up over time. So far, I think that their biggest challenge was the Titans in week 1. And I think that if you redo that game, start fresh and play that game another 9 out of 10 times, I think that game probably goes very different than what it did that Sunday. The Titans, in a way, beat themselves in a lot of ways. Not trying to discredit the Cardinals. I'm just saying that it'll be interesting to see, how they combat a legitimate passing offense like the Rams have, and see what some of these interdivision games bring this week.
Yeah, and you bring those interdivision games up, and you talk about the challenges that the Cardinals have faced this year so far, or the lack of challenges in some regard. They play the Rams, the other 3-0 team in their division, this week, And that's going to be a really big game that is probably going to dictate how this division might go. If the Rams run away with it, that could send a pretty big message to the rest of the division that, hey, this is the top team in this division. And I think the Cardinals are well equipped. They have a really athletic quarterback that's making some big plays here. Still developing as a passer with all these receivers. Well, they got him all these receivers to go to. He can still sling the ball, but he's still working on that. But he's super athletic. He can do all these different things. The halfbacks they have are really impressive. I'll tell you who's not well equipped. That's me. I bought these new non-slip socks the other day. And right before this podcast, I almost slipped and fell and knocked myself out in the bathroom. So I'm not well equipped. But let's move on there. A little tangent there. I was trying to get a little smile from you, lighten it up a little bit.
I've never had any experiences with adhesive socks.
Adhesive. I said non-slip, not adhesive.
Non-slip.
Yeah. I'm trying to walk on walls. I'm not Spider-Man. Let's see. Let's move on to the next game, or the next division. Or not division. Back it up. Let's move on to the Niners. The Niners had a really good game against the Packers. The Packers were in control for a lot of that game. There was some calling for Trey Lance to come in and play in the game. He did come in for a few plays. He had a touchdown and a couple of good plays where he brought him in on short yardage situations, and he looked pretty solid. I don't think it's time for him to come in. Jimmy G's still playing pretty solid football. That team is really solid overall. The defense is good. The pass rush is good. That is a really talented team as well. They're very well equipped. Many people thought they were going to be the ones that step up and take that early lead, but they're sitting at 2-1, so they're only one game back. They have a big game this week, and they have a little bit more to prove because people like to ship the Niners every single season, but there have been a lot of seasons where they just underperform. And I'd be interested to see how the Niners season goes going forward.
Yeah, I think that, the 49ers, you look at their team right now, and I don't think that Garoppolo has lost his job yet. But I also don't think that he's done anything significant to keep his job, throughout the entirety of this season. You look at his stats right here. He's 64 for 95, got a 67% completion percentage, thrown for 760 yards for an average of about 250 a game, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception, and 2 lost fumbles. So those aren't the numbers that will get you benched, but they're also not the numbers that will keep the chatter about Trey Lance away, especially in such a competitive division. So I still think that Trey Lance is going to beat him out for that spot eventually, probably around week 9 or 10. But I mean, as a whole, the 49ers are playing well as a team. All but had that game won against the Packers on Sunday Night Football. Aaron Rodgers did Aaron Rodgers-like things, and that's the difference between them being 3-0 right now and being 2-1. Their first 2 games of the season at Detroit and at Philly, neither one of those are the type of tests that Green Bay was. But in that one test they had against Green Bay, I thought they played pretty well. Took it down to the wire, and unfortunately they weren't able to get the dub. But looking at their schedule coming up, they play the Seahawks this week in San Fran. Next week they play at Arizona, and then they have an early bye week in week 6. So I think that their goal right now should be to win these 2 division games, kind of regroup in that bye week, get some people healthy. They're one of the deepest running back rooms in the NFL. I feel like every Sunday one of their backs is out, and I learn about a new one that just went off. And I think that's a testament to their offensive line. I mean, Trent Williams is just a beast on that tackle position. So
he destroyed a Packer when they played. He destroyed the
He
rookie.
destroyed a couple of Packers. Yeah.
Well, I was trying to take it down a notch.
He was stacking up some pancakes in that game for sure. Still don't understand why Washington soured that relationship and led to what happened, but that's another story for another day. So, yeah, the 49ers are super talented, and I think they're going to be in this race for much of the season.
Yep. And now, if I had to guess, Trey Lance's path to starting on this team is probably going to end up being a lot like Lamar Jackson was when his rookie year, sitting behind Joe Flacco. The offense looked all right behind Joe Flacco. Then it started looking a little bit stale. And eventually, once Lamar came in, they weren't taking him out. Even when Lamar had a bad playoff appearance, there were some calling for Flacco to come back in. And Harbaugh, to his credit, said, no, this is our guy. We're sticking with him. Things could have been a little bit different if they would have changed it up there. He ended up coming back and having a much better performance to end that. They still ended up losing, I believe. But that was a pretty big step. Now, I think that if Garoppolo starts leveling off here and the offense starts seeming a little bit stale, we could see Trey Lance take more and more snaps like Lamar Jackson did as the season went on and eventually take the reins. So we'll see. We'll have to watch that one.
I would say this too. Looking at their current schedule, Seahawks, Cardinals, bye week, Colts, Bears, and then Cardinals, Rams. I think that if Garoppolo struggles in these next 2 weeks against Seattle and Arizona, then you might see them implement Trey Lance as a starter through the bye week and give him an extra week of preparation to just make sure that he's completely comfortable in that offense. And then he has not really, I wouldn't call them tune-up games because, you and I know that anybody can be beat at any given Sunday. That's what makes the NFL so great. But a game against the Colts with a struggling Carson Wentz and a game against Chicago with their offensive line looking, pretty meek right now, I think that might be the course of action that Shanahan takes if Garoppolo struggles in these next 2 games. So that'll probably make it or break it for Jimmy G.
Yeah, that's a good point. And to get to our last team, little preface here. These divisions, the West divisions, mirror each other in a lot of ways. And some in roster construction and just how that ended up being the case. And then both of the fourth place teams in these divisions have former MVP quarterbacks in Russell Wilson and Patrick Mahomes. They are both 1-2, fourth place. They have some big games coming up here, and I think that we should focus on their upcoming games, the rest of their schedule, and see what kind of hurdles they have and who is most likely to make the playoffs from this scenario.
Yeah, so looking at the Seahawks schedule, obviously they're 1-2. They beat the Colts, lost a heartbreaker to Tennessee in week 2, and then lost to the Vikings this week 30-17. The Seahawks kind of faded away in that third and fourth quarter, both offensively and defensively. They just kind of couldn't get it together to kind of rally the troops in the end. Their upcoming games are pretty rough. This week they're playing at San Francisco. They got a week 5 matchup versus the Rams. Then they have to go to Pittsburgh. So even though we've kind of talked about how dysfunctional the Steelers are, they still have a very good, very talented defense, and Heinz Field's not an easy environment to go in and escape with a victory. They have to play the Saints. Then it eases up a little bit. You've got the Jaguars, a week 9 bye week, and they're really going to need that bye week because, Caleb, after that, they have to go to Green Bay and play your Packers. So that's not an easy trek. And then their schedule starts to ease up in the second half. You see games, obviously Arizona, and then they play at Washington, the Niners, at Houston. So that should be a game that they should be able to comfortably take. You got divisional games against the Rams, and then playing in Seattle versus the Bears. So that's, again, with their offensive line looking the way that it is, that should be an easier, sort of situation than an interdivision game. And then they play the Lions and Cardinals. So it's not a schedule that puts the Seahawks in a position where they should panic. I think that they still have a good chance at coming back and making a run at the division, or at least a wild card spot. But they're going to have to clear up some things on that defense in order to do so.
Yep, I think a big game to watch there at the end that could be a sleeper spoiler game would be that game against the Lions, because this Lions team is not a bad team. They've played 3 really tough games, like we said earlier when we talked about Jared Goff. If they get rolling and they start picking up a little bit of steam, and they have the Seahawks, who need to win that game to have any chance to make playoffs, that could be a really big spoiler game. So that's one to watch.
Yeah, I'll admit, when Dan Campbell had his introductory press conference in Detroit,
biting ankles,
when he said he was going to bite a knee off, bite an ankle off, I was laughing. I mean, you don't expect Detroit to do anything. I mean, they've had Stafford, they've had Megatron, they've had Barry Sanders, they've had some good players, but from a program builder perspective, from an organizational perspective, they just can't get the pieces right. They're a little dysfunctional in that sense, kind of like the Jets. But I mean, they played really well, so I think that could definitely be a trap game for them.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite parts about the Dan Campbell, of course, all the press conferences. I mean, you love all that. Just talk about how much coffee he drinks, all this stuff. And then when they got Penei Sewell in the draft room, they're just chest bumping, like, they're just smashing stuff. I'm like, this is like a frat house running a. And I didn't think it was going to turn out well, but I do think this team is playing some mean football and some motivated football, and I think that could end up going a long way. But we've seen things go south pretty quickly as losses pile up. So I hope that ends up developing over time. Not too well, because I don't want them to overtake the Packers, but I do like Dan Campbell.
I don't think you have to worry.
All right, let's go ahead and switch over. Let me do a little. So when I cut this up and separate this, I have a little cool thing. Hey, all right, now we're going to talk about the AFC West. Talked a little about the Chiefs on the last segment, but now let's go ahead and talk about the division leaders. So you got the Raiders and the Broncos at the top, both 3-0. And then you have the Chargers, who had a big, big win against the Chiefs this week. And my man Herbert playing really well, really poised, guiding that team to a victory. That was a big, big game. And then, of course, Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs in 4th place. And for both these divisions, like I said, what is happening to this point is the opposite of what people expected. Almost completely the opposite. The Chiefs were expected to be at the top. The Raiders and Broncos were not expected to be anywhere close to where they are right now. But all of these teams in both of these divisions are playing really good football. So let's start with the Raiders, because I think Derek Carr is having a fantastic year, and this Raiders team looks really solid.
The Las Vegas Raiders.
Yeah, so I haven't checked this morning. I'm pretty sure. Okay, yeah. Derek Carr is still leading the league in passing yards. He has a little over 1,200. Tom Brady is second at 1,087. Kyler Murray third. So that's the first thing that jumps off the page to me. Derek Carr is a guy kind of like Stafford, to where he hasn't really gotten the praise that he deserves, from the league and from the media, throughout his career. He's a guy that I feel like if he didn't have that leg injury, then we would be kind of talking in the same light that we do Matthew Stafford, right now as somebody that can have a, Phillip Rivers type career. And so he's what separates the Raiders with his quarterback play. Specifically, 2 of their games are overtime wins. So that's a team that, knows how to buckle up in the fourth quarter and kind of bow their necks up and go get victories. That's what you need in the NFL.
Yep.
And so it's it's a talented group. We joke every year because it seems like Mayock and Gruden draft Alabama and Clemson guys every single year, trying to build a winning culture and that sort of thing. So, but I think they might have finally done it.
Yeah, there's a lot to be seen so far. They say trust the process, trust the process. For a lot of Derek Carr's time in Oakland/Las Vegas, I don't know if there's been a process. Early on, it was a real big mess, and then after Gruden got there, it was a smaller mess, but still a mess. And now it looks like things are finally coming together. Derek Carr, he constantly throws for 4,000-plus yards and puts up good games. One of the big things people always knocked him for was not pushing it downfield. But there's a lot of factors that go into him not pushing it downfield. Some of his decisions, but also targets and protection issues. A lot of things have changed. He's never complained. He stayed a steady, fast leader. He's been exactly what you want your franchise quarterback to be. There's been talk about replacing him. There have been guys brought in to compete with him. He's never complained, and you got to respect that. He had that big MVP-like season, breaks his leg, comes back from that. I find it really difficult to dislike Derek Carr, and it bugs me when I see Derek Carr slander because it's just not necessary for the guy. And this year he looks really confident that hitting his targets, Darren Waller, and all the receivers that have even Hunter Renfro's coming making plays. He looks a lot more confident. He's pushing the ball down the field. Ruggs, he's pushing the ball down the field a lot more. And that's a big reason why they're winning. And when it comes down to clutch time in overtime, you got to have a guy that's poised and a good franchise quarterback to win those games. And, I think he's finally developing into what I think he can be.
No, definitely. And I will say this. I think that this is the first season under John Gruden, the second go-round, that it feels like the front office, the coaching staff, and the players all have the same heartbeat. Like they're on the same page. They're clicking on all cylinders. There was a lot of incompetency in Oakland before they moved to Vegas. And I feel like it's kind of a perfect storm of the new atmosphere with the new stadium, having fans back, Carr getting some chemistry with his weapons like Ruggs. I mean, Ruggs can be a phenomenal receiver if those two develop a connection with each other. And so I think that it's a perfect storm for the Raiders. You look at their schedule, they have some impressive wins, beating the Ravens on Monday Night Football in Week 1, 33-27. Going to Pittsburgh and getting a road win, 26-17. And then this past week versus the Dolphins, 31-28 on a game-winning field goal. So it'll be interesting to see how the rest of their schedule plays out. They've got, obviously they have to still play the Chiefs twice, which is not easy. You've got a Week 18 game versus the Chargers that could have some serious playoff implications. But they're definitely one of the more fun teams to watch this year, and they're one of the good stories this year.
Yeah. Viva la Raiders. All right. The Raiders are an unexpected team for a lot of people this year, but they're not the only unexpected team. The Broncos had a lot of questions going into this season. Who's their quarterback? Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater? Had a lot of questions there. Ended up being Teddy Bridgewater. Then all the Teddy Bridgewater slander came out, and there's a lot of Teddy Bridgewater slander. And he's a guy that's tough to hate. Again, he had a catastrophic injury early on in his career while he was in Minnesota. Comes back, makes a comeback tour, spends a lot of time behind Drew Brees. Then he ends up getting a job, and he ends up in Denver, wins the job, and is playing really well. I really like Teddy Bridgewater. He spent some time in Carolina as well. These are two really likable quarterbacks, and I like that they're leading their division right now, and I hope they can continue to have success. But that defense is also pretty solid. They had some good pieces last year, and if everybody can stay healthy, especially Von Miller, you have draft picks and young players coming in like Patrick Surtain. This is a solid team that was really just missing a quarterback. And I like Drew Lock's athletic ability, and hopefully he can learn, and when it's his time to come back in, wherever it may be, maybe he has learned and developed as a passer and gets another chance. But Teddy Bridgewater, just don't lose the game, and that seems to be the formula, and it is working.
Caleb, do you think that the Broncos are going to make the playoffs this year?
Without looking at their schedule, I would say there's a good chance.
I think there's a chance. I think that, like you laid out, their defense is much stronger this year, specifically because Von Miller is back. I know Chubb had missed some games. I'm not sure if that's a long-term injury or if it's short-term. Getting him back would be huge for them, but the addition of Surtain, they've got young receivers that are, they've got quick and agile guys like Judy. I know KJ Hamler just went down with a big injury, so that's unfortunate. Talent at the tight end position. You've got your red zone target back in Cortland Sutton. So, I like what the Broncos are doing. I'm gonna side more on the pessimistic side here.
Before you say what you're going to say, you left out one of the most important pieces.
What was that?
Melvin Gordon. One of their key pieces, one of the most important pieces on their offense, and he's available in fantasy. All right,
you can convince someone else to take on that contract. Looking at the Broncos schedule, their first 3 games, you got beating the Giants by 2 touchdowns. Congrats on a victory. Like, you want to go 1-0, but like, it's the Giants. Week 2 versus the Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence has looked pretty rough, and I don't think that that's a Trevor Lawrence problem. I think that's a Jaguars personnel and coaching problem. I don't think that Urban Meyer and Trevor Lawrence are going to have a happy marriage like a lot of Jacksonville fans wanted. So they were, you win that game by 10, you're 2-0, and then week 3 versus the Jets, I would hope that you would win that game. So they're win 26-0 this week against the Jets. So they don't have an impressive win yet. Now, that's not to say that they will not accumulate impressive wins. Like you said, Teddy Bridgewater, how can you not love the guy? Excellent game manager. He's not the type of quarterback where if I'm a opposing team's defensive coordinator that I lose sleep over. But he is the type of guy that can keep your team in the ball game. He could manage the game, limit turnovers, make smart decisions. And he's one of those players that I feel like his football knowledge allows him to excel past his athletic ability. But we're really going to find out what this team is made of the next couple of weeks. They play the Ravens. They play at Pittsburgh versus the Raiders at Cleveland. And so, we'll find out what they're made of. Like you said, the defense is much improved. They've only allowed 26 points in 3 games. So, that's a significant improvement from last year. But then again, those 3 offenses that I laid out, it's like, what do they look like against other teams? And those 3 teams are some of the bottom feeders of the NFL right now. So we'll see if the Broncos can keep the train rolling and see if Orange Crush can continue to stay undefeated in week 4.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Those 2 big games against the Ravens, who I think they'll play pretty well against. I think as long as you can contain Lamar, I think they could play pretty well against that. With Vic Fangio, that defense is going to play pretty well. And that game against Cleveland could be the big surprise game of their season, where everybody will expect Cleveland to win that because by most accounts they probably should win that with their roster and the way they're playing. But if they can come away with that, that sets the pace for their season. And if they get on a roll there, there's no telling what the Broncos could end up doing. So that's 2 teams down. And the team that I think by the end of this thing could end up on top of this division. The way they're playing, the roster they have. The Los Angeles Chargers just beat the runner-up to the Super Bowl, the Chiefs, just beat a big division rival, and now Justin Herbert is 2-1 against Patrick Mahomes. So there's a lot of things going on here. That Chargers team, when healthy, is very talented. And when they won that game, they did it with guts. They went for it several times, charging down the field. They didn't say, well, we're just going to run here and get in field goal position. They said, no, we're going to keep throwing. We're going to keep throwing. And they even got bashed by the announcers that said, well, due to the analytics, you should kick it there. You should run the time down. You don't want to give Patrick Mahomes any time to win this game. You got to play scared. And then they scored the touchdown and missed the extra point. So he was still saying it after that. So I'm not sure how trusting a kicker with the history that the Chargers have had is going to work out. But then they go on and they beat Patrick Mahomes when he gets the ball. To me, that confidence boost of letting Patrick Mahomes get out there, not being afraid to give him the ball and beating him, that means more than playing scared, playing the smart way, and maybe losing that game. So there's a lot of things here to unpack. I really like this Chargers team, if you can't tell.
Yeah, I mean, I like the Chargers too. I think at this point in the season, I like the Raiders just a little bit more than the Chargers. The 3 games that the Chargers have played at Washington, you squeak out a victory there, even though they had to bring in their backup. Week 2 against Dallas, I feel like the Chargers lost that game. I didn't feel like Dallas won that game. Chargers had tons of penalty yards. You just have to clean that up. And then obviously that big win against the Chiefs, like you said, can bring momentum for them. Looking at their team stats for that game, they had 8 penalties in that game for 50 yards. So, you would like to see more discipline from that team. All in all, I think they're going to be in the hunt, for a wild card or maybe even the division at the end of the year. But this is another team where we're going to find out a lot about them the next couple of weeks, Caleb, because this week they're playing the Raiders on Monday Night Football. Next week they have to play Cleveland, and then they have to go to Baltimore, and then they finally get their Week 7 bye week after a much-deserved gauntlet. So, if you're an LA fan, specifically, obviously the Chargers, not the Rams, buckle up. It's going to be a rich couple of weeks of football. So order your wings and make sure that you have the nicest of sound bars because it's going to be an exciting couple of weeks.
I would double down on that. And now we're at the 4th place, and like we did with the NFC, the Chiefs are not supposed to be in 4th place right now. And now let's take a look and see what their odds are of making the playoffs, looking at their schedule.
Yeah, so the Chiefs are an interesting team because I feel like they haven't played up to their potential. It's going into the season, everyone with a brain picks the Chiefs to win that division, just because of the sheer talent they have on offense and how well their play calling is, and just they're going to hang up points on the board. Their problem has been that they have allowed more points than they've scored. So they've scored 92. They've allowed 95. That's not what you like to see this early in the season. Looking at their schedule moving forward, they play at Philly this week. That should be a game that, the Chiefs have to get a win. You can't lose to Philly and go 1-3. You just can't. That's a game that if you have Super Bowl aspirations, you have to sink your toes in and just make sure that you get that W in any way possible. Get on a plane, go back to Kansas City, because then you have to prepare for Buffalo, primetime Sunday Night Football. And I'm really looking forward to that game. I think that's another game kind of like the Bucs and Rams that we had talked about, where it has playoff implications and it feels like a playoff atmosphere. Those are the types of regular season games we love to see in primetime. So talking about some of the rough, games coming up for them, mentioned Buffalo. They have to go play at Washington and play at Tennessee. They get a cakewalk in playing the Giants in Kansas City, and they have to play the Packers in Kansas City. Obviously, they still have to play the Raiders, both home and away. They play the Cowboys, that's in Kansas City. And they play the Steelers, and that's in Kansas City. So a lot of tough teams, but, playing at home benefits them, and a lot of those games are at home. So, Caleb, it's really feeling like, I would say that it feels like the Chiefs' path to a AFC West crown and to win that division, it runs through their interdivision play. They've got to bat down the hatches and if they could take 2 from the Raiders, that would be huge. That's a big swing. And also, I'll mention this. I think that the Seahawks have a better potential for a comeback to win that division than the Chiefs do. Even though the Chiefs are more talented, I think that when you look at their 2 schedules, the Seahawks have a better opportunity to come back and go from worst to first before the season ends. I still think that the Chiefs are going to somehow make the playoffs. I don't know how you couldn't with that offense. They just got to figure it out and start winning some games.
Yeah. I think you bring up the home field advantage for a lot of those tough games. That's big. But it's also important to remember the Chargers just beat the Chiefs in Kansas City. So
that's true.
It's not out of the realm of possibility they lose those games, but it's going to be interesting to watch going forward. Well, that wraps up our deep dive of the Wild Wild West. Is there anything you wanted to add on before we move on to the next thing?
I will say that I have I've got the Raiders winning the division and the Chiefs making the wild card. You know what? I can't do it. I got the Chiefs coming back and winning the division. I've got the Raiders going to the wild card, and I've got the Rams winning the NFC West and the Cardinals in the wild card. Yeah, that's what I'll go with. So, Old Takes Exposed can tag me, at the end of the year and make a fool of me. But that's what I'm going with in week 3.
So, with the new playoff format, there's a potential that 3, even at most, 4 teams from a division could technically make it with the 3 wild card spots.
Yeah, I would probably have to fact check that, but I'm pretty sure you're right.
But that would be difficult, right? So, I like the new playoff format because that makes that first seed even more valuable. So, you have potential to get all these, and that's probably not going to happen. There's just a lot of other good teams in each conference. Listen, I'm going to stick by my love for the Chargers here. I think this is a very good team, very good coaching. Chargers win the division. Now, who comes in second? Well, that really depends on how the Broncos season goes. Depends how the Raiders season goes. I like the Raiders more than the Broncos right now, so I'd say the Raiders in second place. But I think there's a better chance that the Broncos fade off than the Chiefs miss playoffs. So if it's between the Broncos and the Chiefs, I think it's the Chiefs. And that's probably my old takes exposed. I think 3 teams from the AFC West make it. You look around the rest of the AFC, I don't think it's going to be anybody in the AFC South. Maybe another wild card coming from the AFC North. That means that the Browns or the Ravens, or even the Bengals, if you want to go that far, are missing playoffs. I'm not really sold on the Bengals just yet. They got a little while to go. And then in the AFC East, that means you have the Patriots missing, the Buffalo Bills missing, the Dolphins missing. But I think 3 teams from the AFC West making it makes a lot of sense. Makes more sense than in the NFC where you have some really tough division splits. I think the Rams win that one. I would like to think that the Seahawks have a chance to come back and make it, but I think they'll miss it just barely. But I think the Niners will come in second place in that division. And the Cardinals, are they going to be able to make it? Are they going to be a really good team that ends up coming short and not making it because of the other teams making it? The Packers will probably win that division, should win that division. The East, who knows what's going to happen in the East, but the second place isn't going to get a wild card. And then you have the South, Tampa Bay, Carolina, New Orleans, not Atlanta. All of those teams should vie for those playoff spots. So it's going to be really tough in the NFC for three teams in the NFC West to make it. And I think the two that end up making it is going to be the Rams and the Niners. Now, that's nothing against the Seahawks. They've been a really good team for a really long time now. Since 2012, I guess they've been in the consideration for winning a Super Bowl or going deep to the NFC Championship almost all of those years. A lot of good players in and out of that team in that time. But all good things come to an end. I think this might be the end for the Seahawks.
And that could lead to Russell Wilson ended up elsewhere. We'll see.
New York Giants. Big market.
New York, Carolina. There are a couple of options out there.
How dare you turn your back on Sam Darnold after all he's done for the Panthers?
I mean, we'll evaluate where we're at the end of the season, but I'll just leave you with this quote from Tepper at the end of the season. When asked if we would move on from Teddy, he said, we're always evaluating the quarterback position until you have that guy, that can lead you to a Super Bowl, then you have to be evaluating. So I wouldn't put it out of the realm of possibility for Rodgers or Wilson to be pursued by Tepper. He's a guy that he sees what he wants and goes after it. So evident with the contract that he gave Matt Rule. So
yeah, and
we'll see.
With some certain trades that are being made in that organization, which we'll get to a little bit later. All right, so we have time to get to that. Let's go ahead and move on. Big boy shout-outs. We want to do it every week because the big guys need recognition. Again, if you're still hanging out, make sure you get a like and subscribe so you can keep on hearing our beautiful voices or making fun of us for all the bad takes that we have. First up, I have Terence Steele for Dallas. Right tackle, filling in for the suspended La'el Collins. Playing a pretty good game. He went against one of your big boys from last week, Javon Hargrave. Had a pretty solid game against the Eagles. And he's filling in for a tough spot to fill in for. And the Dallas Cowboys keep on pushing through these games. We'll see what happens as the season goes on. But that's a tough assignment, having to come up on short notice and fill in and play good snaps. My second guy is going to be Myles Garrett. Because how can you not talk about Myles Garrett? Now, you can question Matt Nagy's decision to not give any protection to their rookie quarterback on his first start whatsoever. We can talk about that a little bit later, too. But, boy, anytime you get 5.5 sacks, I mean, what do? The guy's a monster. He's a freak. He might be one of the most athletic people in the NFL. And he made that first start really difficult. And then you got Javen Clowney on the other side, who's bringing pressure, but Myles Garrett is just something else.
No, he definitely is. Myles Garrett, there are a few defensive linemen in the NFL where I feel like if I had the body of like a Tyron Smith, that I would still be scared to block. And Myles Garrett is one of those guys. It's everything that you want in a defensive lineman. It's great hands. It's quick feet. I don't know if you saw the move that he put on the left guard of Chicago. He essentially planted his he planted his outside or his inside foot, planted his outside foot and cut in almost like a receiver cuts on a post route. And just like the caption on the tweet that I saw the video was like, no, this is not the Matrix. This is Myles Garrett. He literally teleported and went from being like a shade to all of a sudden being in the center's lap. just an absolute magician on the defensive line, giving quarterbacks nightmares for sure.
I could have the body of Thanos and be afraid of Myles Garrett.
It's a good way to put it. So for my big boy shout-outs this week, I want to give a shout-out to another young guy, Bengals right guard Jackson Carmon. So this was his first start this week. Big guy out of Clemson. He had 19 pass blocking attempts, 0 quarterback pressure, 0 sacks. We've talked about how Cincinnati, needs to get a security blanket, a great pocket for Burrow to feel comfortable around, a king's guard, if you will. And, this is the first step for that. A clean first start in his career. Looks like he'll get the nod at right guard on Thursday against the Jaguars on Thursday Night Football. So, if he can be an anchor on that offensive line and give Burrow some consistent blocking, keeping the defensive line out of Burrow's face, it'll work wonders for that team. You see Burrow developing a connection with Jamar Chase. I think that Jamar Chase has 4 touchdowns on the season now. That connection's something to watch, and I think that Carmon's going to be a big part of that.
Now, I could be wrong. Now, was Carmon originally a tackle and he's playing guard?
I think he played some. I think he played some of both in college at Clemson. I could be mistaken.
Also very impressive.
Absolutely. No, anytime that you can switch positions in the offensive line, it's, whether you're switching sides or switching from guard to tackle, it's just people don't understand
underrated
how difficult that is. So, and then big boy shout out on defense. This is a guy that I've had on my radar for a couple of weeks now. Just an absolute stud whenever you watch the game film. He rarely takes plays off. And that's Michigan defensive end Aiden Hutchinson. So he reminds me a little bit of Max Crosby for the Raiders. So he currently has the highest graded edge score according to PFF at 91.4. He's had 5.5 sacks and 1 forced fumble in 4 games. Michigan hasn't really played the toughest of schedules yet. They're about to get a really tough matchup against Wisconsin this week at Wisconsin. So we'll see how that holds up against a better, stronger offensive line. But so far, Aiden Hutchinson has been a big part as to why the Wolverines are 4-0. And it'll be interesting to see how he plays the rest of the season. A big performance in a bowl game or against Ohio State could potentially land him in the second, maybe late first round. I think he's currently in Todd McShay's top 50. I think that's what I read. So talented guy. It'll be interesting to see his transition into the league once he gets drafted this upcoming season.
Yeah, I would agree. It's going to be interesting to watch how that goes. So now we're going to move on to talk about the games of the week from last week that we talked about, and then the games to watch for the upcoming week. So we brought up a few. I believe you're going to talk about one of these. The Bucs-Rams, good one. The Chargers-Chiefs, we've already talked about earlier. And the last one that we brought up was Washington against Buffalo. It did not end up being a very good game. There were some things you saw from both teams. Buffalo ran away with it. But Taylor Heinicke is still a super athletic quarterback. He can do a lot of things that other quarterbacks can't do, but couldn't come away with the win. So that was a tough game. And my game to watch this week, let's take it to the college ranks. This could be a huge, huge game with playoff implications. Arkansas is playing great football right now. And they have one of the biggest games of their season. And we should say that later in their season, they also play Alabama. They're playing some of their best football, and they have those 2 tough games going ahead of them. And they're both – that one's at Alabama, and this one's at Georgia. My game of the week, and this is college game of the week, is Arkansas versus Georgia. I mean, it's a huge game. If Arkansas knocks off Georgia, Arkansas could end up going to the playoffs, even if they lose to Alabama later on. If they can just win one of these games, they could take the place of Georgia in the Final Four. So that's a big one to watch. Of course, I'm all on the hype train for Georgia. Man, this ain't going to be easy.
Yeah, no, I'm on the hype train for Georgia too. I think it's a game that Georgia will win, but I do think that Arkansas is going to give them a run for their money. My game of the week in college football, and there's a couple that I could have went with. Obviously, Arkansas, Georgia's huge. Cincinnati at Notre Dame is an underrated game. Cincinnati's ranked 7th in the nation. Notre Dame ranked 9th, so that's a top 10 matchup. I think Cincinnati goes on the road and wins that one. Notre Dame hasn't really impressed me this year. They've had some games that they've just squeaked by that they should have won handedly. So my game of the week is number 12, Ole Miss and Coral on the road at number 1, Alabama. Nick Saban has said that this guy is one of the most talented dual-threat quarterbacks that they've faced in years at Alabama, which is some pretty high praise considering the types of players that Saban has coached against while in the SEC. Guys like Cam Newton, obviously Joe Burrow, different guys like that. So I think that game is definitely going to be something that I have my eye on, because a good performance from Coral in that game could propel him into being one of the most talked about quarterbacks in this class. And if he, really struggles against that Bama defense, then all of a sudden you might be looking at a fringe, first, second round guy. I will tell you this, if Ole Miss wins this game, I think that he might have the Heisman locked up, even though it's early in the season. That is a significant Heisman moment. I can't remember if it was the exact year that that Manziel won the Heisman, but him beating Bama was huge, and we saw what with Burrow beating Bama. That was one of the all-time classic SEC football games. So SEC football's heating up. A lot of rivalries, and it'll be an interesting week in college football for sure.
Yeah, not even to mention Florida is also a really good team in the SEC. The SEC is always loaded, but this year they are supremely talented, and they have a lot of guys that a lot of teams that deserve to be in the Final Four. And hot take here, hot takes exposed, maybe, but Ohio State, Clemson, both done. Cut them out. They're done. Period. The end. They're done. They don't deserve it. Next year,
very well might be.
Next year, who knows? But let's have some time to make sure we wrap up here with some of the other things we want to talk about, because I know you want to talk about some of these, especially the Panthers trade. But we saw history this Sunday, and I always sit up in my seat. Even when Joey Sly's kicking like a 70-yarder and I don't think he's going to make it, I always sit up, because if he makes it, that's crazy. We had Matt Prater attempt a 68-yarder, come up about 2 yards short, and it's like, that stinks. They run it back for a touchdown. Doesn't end up affecting the total outcome. And I was like, that's crazy. We saw an 68-yarder attempt. Then later we see a game winner after the Ravens have been handled pretty well by the Lions. A close game here. The Lions lost to the Ravens on a 60-plus yard field goal last time they played them. And now Justin Tucker, who has never missed a field goal in the last minute in regulation.
He's a goat.
It kind of scared me a little bit. I was looking off in the distance, so I peed myself a little bit. But he lines up for a 66-yard field goal and kicks it on a line, hits the bar, flies up like a corny movie scene, and goes in. It was crazy. I mean, that was a crazy game. And I'll run through these, and you can reply at the end of them. But that was a crazy thing. And then you have the Panthers trading for C.J. Henderson. I think I get this Jaguars administration didn't draft C.J. Henderson, but he's a former top 10 pick, a really good man corner. They're playing a lot of zone. They just didn't feel that he was the best fit for them. I figured this might happen when they drafted a corner in the first round this past draft. Trade him to the Panthers for Dan Arnold and a third-round pick. That's a pretty good deal for the Panthers. And now, if Horn can come back healthy at some point this season or in the future, those are some really good, fast, young man corners for that defense. That's already pretty solid. And Richard Sherman has been talked about signing with the Buccaneers. The rich get richer, or the rich get Richard. You guys can quote me on that one. Have I missed anything?
Lions cut Jamie Collins.
Oh, yeah, that's
there's
happened today.
Some speculation that he may or may not be heading back to New England. So that's something to keep an eye on. I think that he could still be a decent linebacker in the NFL. So a lot of teams with needs out there, some guys going down with injuries and that sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that, briefly about the C.J. Henderson trade, I think this is Scott Fitterer, GM of the Panthers, at his finest. I mean, we've seen him go in and make trade after trade after trade in this past year's draft. He's moving picks. It kind of reminds me of the Belichick Patriots about 8 to 10 years ago, where it's like every single year they're the most talked about team at the draft because they're just willing and dealing the entire time. The Panthers had looked into drafting him and, looked into Isaiah Simmons, him, Derek Brown, all for that pick that they had last year. Obviously, I'm glad we took Derek Brown. Being a former lineman myself, I understand his impact on the game. But when you can go get a guy like C.J. Henderson that was in last year's draft class, and all it costs you is a third rounder and a tight end that isn't significantly better than the other tight ends on your roster. Not to mention, Fitterer got back a fifth-round pick from the Jaguars. So I think we're currently without a second-rounder, third-rounder, and one of our other picks, maybe a fifth or sixth in next year's draft. But I have no doubt that Fitterer is going to move around and re-supplement those picks in, whether it's by trading players or future picks. So, yeah, you take a flyer on a guy that is still on his rookie deal, is locked up for the next 2 or 3 years. And when this secondary is healthy, it's going to be scary because now you have, like you said, Dante Jackson, C.J. Henderson, and J.C. Horn, who are all great in man coverage. You have Jeremy Chin back there roaming around in the secondary. So, love the trade. I have all the confidence in the world in the Panthers GM, Scott Fitterer, and it's a really exciting time in Carolina right now.
Yep. I think the way they've drafted and the way they've traded, there's a lot of teams that have a lot of mid-round picks right now because a lot of teams are trading back from this last draft, and there's a lot of teams that have a lot of those mid to later picks. One of those teams being the Jaguars that we just talked about. So I could see possibly the Panthers moving down from their first-round pick, depending on how their season goes, and moving down. But that's way in the future. Let's not talk about the draft just now. I love the draft, but it's week 4. All right. Any final thoughts before we head on out of here?
Yeah, I guess my final thought is just it's a great slate of NFL games this upcoming week. We hinted at some of the college games that were coming up. In NFL, you got Panthers at Cowboys Sunday, 1 o'clock. Seahawks at San Fran. You've got the Cardinals at the Rams. You've got the Bucks at the Patriots, and you have the Raiders at the Chargers. So I'm really looking forward to those 2 night games. On Sunday, you've got Tom Brady making his highly anticipated return to Gillette Stadium with fans there. It's going to be rocking. They're going to probably have some sort of video tribute to him. And then I think that Brady's going to proceed to rip Belichick's throat out of his skull and win by 40. Monday Night Football, you have the Raiders at the Chargers. What's not to love about that matchup? I'll be watching the Peyton and Eli broadcast because I've enjoyed that so much. Last night he had LeBron, Nick Saban, Matthew Stafford, just some great guests on there. So
Flipping off America.
Yeah. Eli's a nut, man. The Mannings, they have a weird sense of humor, but I mean, it's just such a better broadcast. It's just so much more personable. But,
I like that LeBron buried his high school quarterback on live. This quarterback's been for 20 years talking about how LeBron was his receiver. Like, man, I hooked him up all these times. I played with LeBron, and all these stories he's been telling. He gets home and watches this game, and he gets buried on national television. Everyone knows. That was great. It is something else, and it is one of the best ways to watch football, and I'm glad it exists. I hope we see more stuff like that.
For sure.
All right.
Maybe we should do a live stream sometime.
Oh,
do a live stream with some of our Hogmolly Hustle people and just watch a game. You and I can commentate and just shoot the bull and that kind of thing. So we'll look into that.
Yeah, we can look into that, or we can watch some cooking shows. Either way, I'm fine with either option. Anyway, if you stuck around, thank you for watching. Make sure you pancake that like button. Pour some syrup on that subscribe button. And leave us a comment if you think we're morons. We can take it. We're big boys. Again, thank you for watching. See you next week.